Hello, and welcome to AI news that you should know about for the week of December 26th. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey.
And I'm Daniel Hill. We consolidate the top AI headlines into 15 minutes or less, giving you digestible insights based on honest takes. That's what we do here every single week. We really appreciate you listening, and we thank you for your patience during our brief pause. This week, we'll be talking about everything that happened in AI in 2025, then making our predictions for 2026. Ashley, what categories will we be talking about?
We're going to be talking about AI industry shakeups because there have been so many this year. We'll be talking about AI regulations and policy signals, or lack thereof. We'll be talking about consumer and platform innovation. This was the year of smart glasses, it seems. And then last but not least, we'll be talking about AI in business and everyday work. AI slop or substance. We'll be covering all of that on our show today. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back. Let's dive in. A lot of things happened in the tech world in 2025, and we're going to break that down into four categories. So let's dive into AI industry shakeups. 2025 was the year of AI industry shakeups. We had OpenAI with their code red race, Google's Gemini ecosystem shifting, and we talked about the benchmarks that Apple did earlier this year to determine which language learning model would be best to integrate into Siri. And Google's Gemini came out on top. So we've also seen a lot of different industry shakeups with the top tier companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and many, many more. Meta has definitely been hiring this year. We saw Alexander Wang get a multi-billion-dollar package as the new head of AI for Meta, and a lot of other hiring shifts across Apple, Meta, Google ecosystem, which I think will signal kind of what's in 2026.
Can I just ask you a question? If you had
Sure.
a prediction in 2024, at the end of 2024, would you have thought that Gemini would be better than ChatGPT at this point at the end of 2025? Would you have predicted that?
Not a single time. No way. Would you?
No, I don't think I would either. I would have thought ChatGPT is so early to the game. OpenAI came out the gate first. They're going to be the leader for the considerable future. And the fact that we have seen Google take such a large step forward in front of OpenAI, and OpenAI panicking to put this code red into place, like you mentioned, not something I ever would have suspected happening, but I think it's indicative that Google's really made a smart investment here and it's paid off.
Yes, I think the fact that one, just because you're first to market doesn't mean you'll stay there. You'll stay ahead of the game. And this is a really good example because I feel like Google used all of their resources to get ahead of the game now that there was someone else that was first to market to learn from their mistakes. So interesting to see where this goes into the future, especially as we go into 2026. All right, next up, AI regulation and policy signals. This is my jam. So there have been a lot of legislative and ethical movements shaping this space on a global scale. Denmark was the first country to pass a law that protects the rights of its residents visually. So thinking of your face, your body, your likeness, that's now protected in Denmark. We do not have any other laws or legislation anywhere globally that has that same level of protection. So with that becomes a lot of different ethical and privacy data concerns. There's also legislation that's going to be passed in Japan. Japan's going to pass their first AI law in January of 2026. Here in the US, we've had a lot of flippy floppy policy and legislation. We are at a race right now of who can get to it fastest, i.e., who can get to the best AI language learning model across the countries. But there is a risk of lack of policy and legislation. And unfortunately, those risks are people's lives, not to mention resources like water that are really important to the world. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot of lack of policy and legislation in the US. And even 2 weeks ago, there was still movement about is there going to be a moratorium on the states of implementing any kind of AI laws? And that wasn't the case, but now it's back into the zeitgeist and really pushing forward to be law, which is really alarming because that would put a 50-year moratorium on any states in the United States passing any kind of legislation. California and New York have been the first two states to pass really substantial legislation. New York just recently in the past 6 months have passed legislation to protect citizens against AI price gouging, which is really awesome. And then California is starting to pass legislation to protect teens when it comes to using AI chatbots. And I'm following two cases from OpenAI and Character.ai that will go into trial in 2026. Both of them having to do with, unfortunately, teenagers who died by suicide after having relationships with chatbots. So, if you're a parent out there, I encourage you to be very engaged in your kids' AI online usage. I tell kids that I interact with in my consulting role to treat AI like a stranger. You wouldn't give a stranger a photo of your family or tell them about your favorite ice cream flavors. It's just not something that we need to do now. So until there's policy and legislation to protect kids, then we need to do our best of doing that. So there's a lot to focus in on here, but what are your thoughts, Daniel?
I think we have seen a lot of areas where we do need legislation to protect people from AI. I think we'll talk more about Sora and some of the other tools that are available. But I think if you had asked me, I would have thought there would be more protections in place by this point. So I think a little bit surprised that there aren't, but to your point, this is a thing that, it's complicated. You can't just say for a blanket statement, all companies should do this or this shouldn't be allowed. It is an involved discussion, but yeah, there's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it. And when I was in Belgium, really asked to the community, because that's the heart of the international capital of the European Union, what are your thoughts on AI? It was really contrasting to hear some people's like actually being for lack of policy and legislation because they look at the US as like a modeled behavior of amazing business opportunity. And there's like dark sides to that too. So in the conversations I tried to have of helping people see both sides of the coin. So very interesting. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Here's a couple of other themes that we saw throughout the years. Another one has to do with consumer and platform innovation. Over the past 12 months, we've seen Meta and OpenAI make social feeds, creating AI experiences that you can scroll through. I think if you had asked me 12 months ago if that's something that people would want, I would have said no. But having swiped through a feed of just AI content, I have seen some things that I thought were interesting and were worth watching. Ashley, what are your thoughts on social feeds from apps like from Meta and OpenAI?
I think we saw more slop than substance this year, especially when it comes to companies using AI for advertisements, i.e., Coca Cola being one of them. People just aren't having it. It's really taking the creativity and fun out of advertising, in my opinion. And it was cool. It was more of like a hat trick, a party trick, parlor trick. Whenever Meta released their new image generation, where you could say, turn this into a desert disco. I mean, that's cool, but what is the practical business use case for that? I don't know if it necessitates the millions of gallons of water that's being used to generate that. So hopefully 2026 has more substance than slop.
Yes. And we also saw a huge step forward in the world of smart glasses. We've talked a lot about that on this show. Meta really has a large lead, it seems like, on some of the other hardware makers. I saw that Google recently announced that they were going to be having AI glasses. It's been a long time since we've seen glasses hardware from Google. I'm excited to see what it is, but it seems like Meta has such a lead. And to the point that you made a few minutes ago, just because you come out of the gate first or you come out the gate the fastest doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to win the race long term. But Meta has such a head start. And I think that's something where we've seen more consumer adoption as people are becoming okay with seeing them in their normal lives.
And one thing to mention to that is also reducing barrier to communication. Because when I was in Belgium, a lot of people speak French. I was able to use my Meta glasses for live translation in the moment. So if someone was speaking French to me, they could even push it to its limits by talking very quickly. And there was maybe a half a second lag to where I could hear the English translation in real
Wow.
time in my ear. So that was a huge benefit to be able to communicate when you're traveling. I thought about that, 3 years ago.
Right, right. And the next category we're going to talk about is AI in business and how companies have been using it. What have the results been? And there are two main stories that we talked about in preparation for this podcast. The first was Air Canada, what happened when a customer service chatbot told a passenger that they could use a bereavement refund, which didn't actually exist. Air Canada doesn't have a policy like that. And how the passenger booked their ticket based on that information. Air Canada refused to give them a refund when they asked for it. The customer sued, and eventually the customer won. The court ruled that Air Canada was bound by what its own chatbot had said and what kind of precedent that set. And I think that's interesting because companies are using AI to cut costs and saying, oh, how can we incorporate AI and eliminate humans and look how much better our company will be as a result? Well, here's a clear case where it wasn't. Not only did it provide a bad customer service experience for the user, it led to negative publicity. It led to a court case where there was a refund that had to be paid. So, a lot of things. Was it really worth the AI in that specific case? And then the other example that we talked about was Deloitte when they submitted an analysis report to the Australian government based on welfare that was about welfare policy compliance. And it turned out that Deloitte had used generative AI to fill in gaps in the analysis, which had a lot of errors, fabricated citations, into footnotes, invented data, and Deloitte was forced to refund the entire project and issue a public apology. Again, this is a company that's supposed to be leading the way in innovation, showing how AI can be used and replace people, but ultimately to its detriment. So I think these are two really key examples that AI has not been as great in the workforce in 2025 as people have been saying it has been or it could be. We're not there yet. What are your thoughts, Ashley?
This is exactly why I'm in the business of AI consulting. Is because a human in the loop is absolutely required. And if these two companies had consulted with legitimate AI consultants and experts on thoughtfully integrating it and responsibly deploying it, they wouldn't have been here because there would have been a human in the loop to protect against fabrication of information, as well as handing over a report to a client that where it had not a single human being double checked that report. That's really alarming to me that a big four would do that. So I always share these examples to my clients to help them understand the importance of having these decisions and doing it intentionally, whether it's on answering a question or providing information. These are serious. And not to mention the PR nightmares between Air Canada and Deloitte. That's something that is intangible almost, but it's been a really bad look for a lot of companies that have just tried to move fast and break things without thinking with the future. So I'm glad to have job security in that, but I always encourage people to ask questions and integrate intentionally instead of just choosing the shiniest tool on the shelf. Kind of crazy.
Yes. All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about our insider predictions for AI in 2026 and what that means for you. All right, welcome back. Let's continue with our year-end review. Now let's move on to predictions, and we're going to break them down into categories. Ashley, let's start with your 2026 predictions for the legal world.
Okay, so first I will start by saying this. I am not a lawyer, so please take this as not legal advice. So my opinion for what 2026 is going to have when it comes to AI policy and legislation, we're going to see a lot of global participation. Right now, Japan is set to release its first AI law in January of 2026. Denmark passed their law on protecting likeness. The EU is currently setting its own AI framework in place. And we're starting to see some resistance of legislation here in the US from our administration directly on putting a moratorium on states enacting any kind of AI legislation for at least 50 years. That hasn't made its way past the finish line yet, but it's getting really close. So we're going to see a lot of different movements, but I do think it's worth paying attention to what the European Union is doing because they have been working on this since before ChatGPT came out because AI has existed before 2022, believe it or not. So there have been frameworks set in place for where we are now. It's now a question of whether or not people are going to act on them, and secondary, who's going to enforce them because we haven't even had that conversation yet. So very much in the infancy of this, but I encourage everyone to stay tapped in and to know that you are a part of the conversation as well, because these laws will and do impact every single one of us.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I would say that the lack of laws have really had an impact. And we talked about, especially around the area of mental health and how much that has affected people. By the same token, people are using these AI tools to have mental health conversations with, which I think is helpful. But also, if there's no regulation around that, the way there are for actual therapists and other people who have to be qualified in order to help people with their mental health, there do need to be some laws and regulations in there as well.
Absolutely. Some guidelines because there is a mental health crisis in the US and probably globally, especially when it comes to young kids who have developing brains still and who are developing identities. I couldn't even imagine being a teenager in this day and age. Could you?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a very different environment. Let's move on to our next category, which is AI capabilities and product evolution. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
So, global perspective, we're at a race to the top amongst countries like China, Russia, EU, and more. There's still a trust issue between users and tools. We need to work together on that. I rewatched the movie AI that came out in 2002. Yeah, with Haley Joe Osment. And it's always a good reminder of the relationships. We as humans, we're naturally going to fear things that we don't understand and we don't know. And we're seeing this tipping point right now of people being very anti AI. When you see it in advertising, when you see it in your books that you're reading, it's a trust issue. So we need to work on a harmonious relationship or understanding how to articulate what does a harmonious relationship look like, and how do we hold a machine or algorithm responsible for actions. Like, we don't have an answer for that quite yet. But secondary to those ethics, I'll say the data centers conversation. There's a huge impact on environment and local communities through the extreme water and resource usage. So there's a need for alternative energy sources to meet the needs of AI. And that's a large part of why we reported earlier this year of companies buying up nuclear reactors like 3 Mile Island and leasing them for decades to be able to produce energy there. So we're seeing that pivot, but it's still affecting communities. And I think water is our most precious resource, so we have to protect it.
I think the public perception one is really interesting because I think we have all accepted that we don't have privacy anymore, right? And that's normal. And one of the things that my wife and I have been talking about a lot lately is analog spaces and sort of what it's like to attend an analog event or just taking yourself more offline to have a more relaxed, more informal experience that you know isn't being recorded, can't be shared, and whatever. And I think that's something where people recognize that the public doesn't need to know everything you're doing. So I think we're going to have more of those types of conversations in 2026.
I agree. I shared a white paper with you when I talked. Listened to a friend who was a policy manager at Meta give a talk, and they shared a bystander privacy white paper that talks about the exact thing we were talking about on persistent capture versus contextual capture. Mind blowing. But it's like these companies know about it and they're trying to educate the public on it. And there's a huge disconnect, like you said.
No. And the last category, Ashley, what are your predictions for business when it comes to AI in 2026?
Let's see. I feel like AI in 2025 has been hype more than groundbreaking tech. So I think 2026 will be all about agentic AI. We've seen a little bit of taste of that this year, but agentic AI is going to have a significant impact because it also presents a lot of cybersecurity threats that organizations just aren't ready for. Whenever a machine is taking actions on your behalf because you've given it that autonomy, it can go very far. So that needs to be handled, but more importantly, it needs to be understood and guidelines on how to use agentic AI and what it shouldn't be used for. Second, I think multimodal. I've been a big fan of multimodal input since like 2021. Everything that we interact with almost on a daily basis has multimodal input. Next time you pick up your remote control, multimodal. My phone is flashing right now. Multimodal. I can't hear it, but I can see it. So, or the haptic feedback, multimodal. So I think we're going to really lean into that because companies are trying to figure out how to harmonize their AI software with hardware. And that will come multimodal, whether that's through speaking on a pen or having a pen distribute like infrared signals in front of you. Who knows? But those are two of my predictions for business. What about you, Daniel?
I think the business world is going to realize that consumers are using AI and the same way Netflix, raises their prices, Spotify raises their prices. I see Google and OpenAI trying to capture more money by charging consumers rather than charging businesses because people use it on a personal level and they might just use it infrequently, but do they use it frequently enough that these companies can start charging for it? And so they can figure out a path to monetization for these tools a lot more quickly. That's my prediction. It may not come to pass because, these companies have so many opportunities to borrow money and take on debt and other business revenue coming in the case of Google. But that's my prediction when it comes to business in 2026.
Yep. I think, yeah, we're going to see a lot of shakeups for sure and things that we don't know that are coming.
Exactly. That is it for our AI news that you should know about this week. Thank you to everyone who has listened to the show this year. We'd like to thank all of the countries who have tuned in to listen to the latest AI news that you should know about episodes across the globe. India, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Ireland, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Africa, the Philippines, France, Germany, Nigeria, the Netherlands, Indonesia, Belgium, Sri Lanka, Romania, Finland, and many more. It's because of you listening that we've been able to make this show of digestible AI news with honest takes each week. When we launched this show in August this year, we never would have imagined that it would take off the way that it has. If you have not left a review, we would really appreciate it. Now is the time. It takes a minute, and it really goes a long way to helping others to be able to find the show. You can find links to everything we've talked about in the show notes, and you can also connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and how we can improve it. You can find me at Daniel Hill Media on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube.
If you want more tech talk, you can find me on Instagram at AshleyRCoffee89. And you can find my other podcast called Copy and Code, where I have long form interviews with tech leaders in the space, anywhere you get your podcasts. But if you're looking to hire an experienced AI consultant to help you take that next step of responsible implementation for your business, reach out. I run Copy and Consult, a local consulting firm working worldwide that helps small and medium sized businesses leverage technology for efficiency and profitability. So I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out.
Thank you for listening, and come back next week for more AI news that you should know about.